This video is made possible thanks to the EA Creator Network. Hi guys, I'm Nini and welcome to my first ever YouTube video. Yeah, that's right, my first one ever. Okay, so disclaimer right off the bat, I am, like I said, not a YouTuber. I've never made a video before. I live stream mainly, so there's going to be a lot of mistakes. There's probably some bad editing and all kinds of problems. Just ignore them. Just move on, okay? Just, yeah, pretend it's not there. What I really wanted to talk to you about today was this really cool opportunity that I got from the Sims team to build three of the lots actually for Chestnut Ridge in the new Horse Ranch pack. So this is probably the coolest thing that has ever happened to me, probably the coolest thing that will ever happen to me. And today we're going to talk about the first of the lots that I did, which is the canyon crossing up in the national park, as we called it back then, or Galloping Gulch as it's called now. So let's get to it. So here we are at the canyon crossing lot, and is it not just the most beautiful place you have ever seen? Now, when we went through the brief of the world and the lots we were going to build for the very first time, this was the first of the neighborhoods we looked at, and I am pretty certain, if I don't remember totally wrong, that this was the first lot we actually got shown by the team, and I just instantly fell in love with it. This neighborhood is my favorite out of the three by far. The other two are good, but this is just on another level, if you ask me. And this lot in particular sits perfectly on top of this little hill overlooking the canyon, and I just fell in love with it the instant I saw it. So much so that this was actually the lot that I had as my number one pick for what I really would like to do. So when I got assigned this lot, I was super happy. This build is a little bit different than the other houses I built for two main reasons. First of all, I didn't actually have a budget for this. The other two homes I did for this pack are starter homes. So here I really enjoyed having the freedom to just use the items that I felt fit and not be constrained by any type of financial burdens. The other big difference is that I'm actually building for a resident that lives here. We have Don Gooseman and his horse Duke that is meant to live on this lot, so that was another thing I had to take into consideration. As a builder, that was a bit of a new thing for me. I tend to just build whatever I feel like. I don't very often, in fact, I probably almost never build with a specific sim in mind. So that was definitely a learning experience for me, and I think I handled it pretty well. And it was definitely a fun experience to get to build in a different way than what I normally do. Okay, so our good friend Don, who lives here, is a retired horse champion, and he is now living out his days with his horse, Duke. He is an outdoorsy kind of guy. He enjoys fishing, riding. He's a bit of a loner, so he prefers to be by himself. And these were the things that I thought about when trying to build this house. As you can see, I've gone for a very simple cabin design here and nothing too fancy. When I was given the brief of the house, it didn't really say anything specific in terms of what they wanted, but they referred to it as a charming but small home in a national park, and they also referred to it as a humble shack. Now, this spurred on quite a bit of fun for us actually, because when we were looking for inspiration for this house, we were Googling murder shacks. Yeah, that's right, murder shacks in the woods. And I still refer to it as the murder shack today. There were two main elements that I really wanted to add to this cabin. The first one being the porch you can currently see. I think if you live in a place like this, you would definitely spend a lot of time outdoors, and sitting outside and taking in the scenery, I imagine, is a really nice perk of living here. The other element is the exterior chimney on the side, which of course will correspond to a grand open fireplace on the inside of the house. One thing I can reveal about myself is that I am really indecisive when I'm building, and I go through and I try a lot of different variants, and especially when it comes to the swatches. As you can see, I am really struggling with this staircase at the moment. Now, one of the things for me is that I really were trying to match the wood because that's what we do, but the only staircase I had at the time from the pack was the one that has that white edge underneath, and that just didn't look good. So I were trying every other possibility known to man. I also had a hard time with the windows and doors and trying to decide on them. I discussed the windows a little bit with the team because we were considering the realism aspect of them. Is it okay to have open windows with no glass in an area like this? It does still get cold in winter, so that were definitely factors we were looking at. I think I tried every single window up and down, but I kept coming back to these because to me they were the only ones that really made sense. So I'm glad they're the ones that stuck in the end. Now, here I'm trying to choose a door. This was another problem for me because I really wanted to use the doors from the pack, but they were beautiful, but just not right for what I'm trying to do here. It was just the wrong style. So I went through so many doors trying to match the wood and also find a simple enough style that I liked. And yeah, I was having a hard time. In the end, I do end up with the base game door you can see currently. And I think that was the best choice for this actually. Another thing I have yet to talk about is the other residence of this house, which is the horse Duke. Now, he will also need a place to stay, and I'm currently trying to work out where I want the different elements on the lot. As you can see now, I am moving the house to the right so that I can put Duke's stable on the left. Now, you may notice that I actually check the gallery photo a lot. This has been a habit of mine for a very long time, probably since I started building, and it stems from, I guess, being a gallery builder. So I think a lot about the curb appeal, and I think a lot about where do I want the different elements so that the things that I want shown are the things you can actually see. I am now trying to work out the stable for Duke, and I'm using the term stable very loosely because I don't really think this technically can be called a stable, but it's a place where he can sleep and do horse stuff. One pain about building for a project like this is that you do not have cheats, you do not have access to debug, and there is a long list of other considerations to take. So the columns, especially as you can see here, were a bit of a pain to try and work out because they actually have a really, really large footprint. And this is not just for this build, but for some of the other builds that I was doing, this also came into play a lot. And I know the other builders that built for this kind of had the same issue. So yeah, columns were a bit of a pain, but in the end, I managed to work something out. Now, currently, I am actually putting walls up because I wanted a roof on it. And the simplest way to put a roof on is to, well, put walls up, to be honest. So then I can put the fence back in and put the columns back in, and voila, you have a, what would you call it? A horse shed, maybe? In any case, I'm sure Duke will be very happy here. Now, I don't think I mentioned before who my co-builders for this pack was. I was teamed up with Dr. Ashley, Simproved, and Chrissy YT for this. They are amazing builders and they're super nice people, and you should really check them out. I will leave some links and all that stuff below. But yeah, they were amazing. Finally, I'm starting on the inside and I'm currently trying to work out a floor plan. So one habit I have when building is that I always build from the outside in. So I will do the exterior first and then I will try and work out a floor plan based on that. Now this causes a lot of problems for me a lot, especially because I have a tendency to put a lot of windows in my houses. So when I'm trying to then work out a floor plan and make the inside make sense, it doesn't always make sense. Going through this whole process, I really feel like I'm coming out as a better builder at the end of it. The requirements are definitely intimidating when you first go through them, and there is a lot of things to think about. Most people are aware that you don't have cheats, you don't have debug, but there's definitely a lot of elements that people might not know about. You also can't do any type of alt placing or alt rotating, which was a little bit more difficult to handle, but it actually went better than I expected. Performance is another thing we have to think about because we have to keep the lots within a certain performance limit, I guess you could call it. Every single object you place has a performance cost, and some items cost more than others. For example, kitchen counters are very performance heavy, and yeah, I got told I had to cut down on my kitchens. Now here I am trying to do a bump out on the side of the house. This stems from me trying to buy myself a bit more room on the inside to work out a better floor plan. In the end, it just didn't work out. It didn't look good, and it actually made the inside of the house even harder to work out in terms of the floor plan. So yeah, I had to scrap it. Now I am moving the stable, and I'm just going to call it a stable, okay? I'm moving the stable to the right side, and I'm moving the house to the left side, which will be the placement you know from the game today. I did also at some point actually experiment with the bump out being turned into a stable on the side of the house, like instead of being detached like it is now, to actually attach it to the side of the house. But I didn't like the look of it, and that idea also ends up being scrapped. Now I'm finally working out a floor plan. It is not the floor plan that you currently will see in game, but this is the floor plan I had when I delivered it for the first feedback session. One thing you might notice now that I'm starting on the interior of the house is that I initially start out with a lot of preferences that are very personal to me. So I pick colors and I pick items that I just tend to gravitate towards. This is a really great example of where the feedback sessions helped me a lot because I got challenged on the choices I made, and not in a bad way, but I was having to think about, okay, does this make sense for Don? Like it looks great, but does it make sense for Don? I'm the kind of person that if left to my own devices, I will absolutely put plants everywhere in a house. I love having green accents. It's just one of those habit things that I mentioned earlier. So that was definitely hard when going into this because you had to kind of break those habits a little bit, which definitely was a little bit difficult. In Don's case, I think it was a matter of he might not have a lot of plants inside, but he is into gardening. So I did leave some gardening clutter for him to kind of reflect that part of his personality. Now, I'm getting started on the bedroom. Now, the bedroom is interesting in that this is one of those good examples where I kind of revert back to my own personal tastes. So I'm going for very light swatches. Like I will end up picking the blue. There we go. I have my blue, and I'm adding a statement wall of all things. Now, looking back at it, I definitely don't think Dawn is the kind of person that will paint a statement wall, and also it's worn, so that actually doesn't really make any sense. But it does get removed eventually, and for the first hand in, yeah, there's a whole totally different type of color scheme going on. But the bedroom was the room that I struggled the most with when it came to the colors. I did initially struggle a lot with the idea of everything being wood. Like you might notice that the floor is wood, the walls are wood, and eventually the ceiling will also end up wood. And normally when you build, you really want to try and create some interest and depth in colors and not just have everything in the same tone. So I spent a lot of time experimenting, not just in the bedroom, but in all the rooms, trying to work out, okay, can I introduce other colors somehow? Because if you notice also a lot of the interior pieces that I decorate with also ends up in wood tones, so that's why I really struggled with that and went back and forth on, is that really okay? In the end, I kept coming back to the answer being yes. Yes, this is the only thing that actually makes sense when you think about the type of cabin that I'm going for, and it just had to be brown. Another thing you might be thinking is, now what is she doing with that really fancy kitchen in this very old cabin, and what is up with that fireplace? So, when building for a project like this, it's a little bit unique in that not everything is actually in the dev version when we start building. So, we had a number of build by assets already there, but there was also a lot of them that weren't in yet. How they solved that was that they would give us these large sheets, essentially, that had images of the different objects that, well, both the ones that were in game, but also the ones that weren't. So we would be able to see the concept art for it, I guess, and a lot of the inspiration for them, and also the different swatches, so that we can kind of look through it and pick out items we want to use. So the items I have in currently, especially for the fireplace, is mainly just to have a stand-in. So first, I'm not actually forgetting that I want something there, and second, so that I'm able to place everything around it. Like, I picked this fireplace specifically because it is a three tile fireplace, and I knew that the fireplace that I'm going to use eventually for this build is a three tile fireplace, so I wanted to make sure all the furniture around it is placed in a way that makes sense. Now, here I am trying to work out the different zones of this cabin. So I have a very large kitchen at the moment, and instead of having a dining area, I have a breakfast counter as part of the kitchen instead, which saves me a little bit of space, but it's still not a lot to work with. I'm trying a lot of different furniture here, and another thing that I haven't mentioned is that this is the first of the houses I'm doing, so I'm also going through the items and the whole catalog for the first time. So a lot of the footage of me trying things is kind of just checking out what is in the catalog, what can I use, what do I like, and what actually makes sense in this space. So initially, I think I had a lot of items in here that was just things I thought were pretty, but not necessarily fitting for the build. And that's something I kind of correct with help of the feedback sessions as we go on. But yeah, that kind of explains some of the maybe somewhat strange choices, like the plants. And I'm pretty sure I'm about to find this large china cabinet to put in the corner, because I mean, I really like it. It's a very, oh, there it is. It's a very rustic cabinet. I use it a lot in my builds, but it's not really dawn friendly, I guess I would say. So I do end up swapping that out with a different item a little bit later. Now let's go back to the floor plan for a little bit. So obviously this is the first version of the house that you're looking at now. So the floor plan was very different. Funny story there is that as part of the feedback session, the team actually pointed out that we had some of the homes with very similar floor plans, mainly the small homes. And they had some examples just to kind of illustrate, okay, see here, these are very similar. Maybe we can look at trying to make some changes here so they don't all have the same floor plan. Now, looking at that feedback, I realized that, okay, so well, two of those homes are mine. So for that reason, I went back and I thought to myself, okay, maybe I should try and look at the different floor plans and can I make any changes that make sense? I did end up changing the house here, and you will see that a little bit later. But I think it was a really good choice because with the floor plan as it is in game now, there is a lot more room around the fireplace, which I think makes so much more sense to have the majority of the open space around the fireplace, considering it is such a big piece in the home. So very glad that we made that choice, or that I made that choice. All right, so going back to the build, we are now in the bathroom and we have to put in a toilet and some toilet paper. Now, if you're part of my Twitch community, you will know that toilet paper is a huge deal. It started a very long time ago with a friend of mine that was really into realistic building, and toilet paper of course being an important part of that, and that really resonates with me because I like to build the same way. So toilet paper is a big deal in my streams, and I could just tell you now, if I do not have toilet paper in any of my builds, I would be ridiculed to the end of days. So I double and triple checked that every single build had toilet paper when I delivered them. And they did, thankfully, because if not, that would be embarrassing. Now, this photo is a little bit funny because I don't know what you're thinking, but I had a specific person in mind for that photo, and I've heard some comments on it, and people seem to assume that maybe this is Don's girlfriend or something like that. Now, when I placed it, I actually thought to myself that I think it's a picture of his mother. Yeah, I don't really know why, but because it's such a dated photo and looks very old fashioned, it didn't really make sense to me that it would be a girlfriend because it seemed too old. So in my head, it's a picture of his mom. As you may have noticed, I've just been going through the build and replacing the light fixtures. So I really love the subtle saucer lights because they are amazing as build lights, and it's always the first thing I put into a house, and then funny enough the last thing I replace. But lights are actually really important for me in terms of setting the mood of a specific room or an area. So the subtle sources for me don't normally bring anything because they're just kind of there. Or like for a cabin like this, they're just kind of the wrong vibe. It would look a bit funny with that kind of light. So I went back and I changed them all, and yeah, that's normally one of the last things I do. While I remember, I can point out that obviously the build you see right now is very different from what is in game currently, but also the finished version that I handed in to the team after we were done with the feedback sessions will also be a little bit different to the final version that you see in the game. So when we started this project, we were told that even after we have handed everything in and it's out of our hands, the team might have to go back and make some changes to adjust for performance and other things. So we were aware of this, but obviously I didn't know exactly what had been changed or how much had been changed before I came back for early access and were able to see the lots again. But for this lot, very little actually changed. I barely think anything on the inside changed at all. I think, funny enough, the radio that I will be placing a little bit later had a color change swatch. But other than that, I don't think I noticed anything on the inside. I think the only noticeable difference is that they did update some of the landscaping, and this was mainly because the landscaping items when we were building this weren't actually in the game, so they weren't available to us. And frankly, I didn't even know what type of items were meant to be in the game at ship. So yeah, they just didn't exist to me. So you will see that the tree and some of the flowers and such around the house is a little bit different than what it is in my final version. But to be quite honest, when it came to the landscaping, I think it's an improvement. And I actually really like the flowers they put in and such. So I'm happy about that. The other thing you might notice is that Duke's little, okay, well, we're still calling it a stable. Duke's stable has changed a teeny tiny bit. So it's basically just been made a little bit larger because they had to add in the water trough. And this was another item that were not available when I was building this. And I don't even think that I had any idea that it was meant to come in. And that could just be because I didn't pay attention. But in any case, it wasn't there. So when they were trying to find a way to incorporate it, I imagine that they saw the best solution being okay, we'll just extend the stable a little bit, make it slightly larger so that we can fit both the food and the water trough. Currently, I am putting the finishing touches on the landscaping. Now this lot is not huge and thankfully didn't require a lot of landscaping, so I think I may do by just having some grass around the lot, etc. But to anyone who knows me, they know that I really hate landscaping because I really struggle with most types of landscaping because it doesn't make sense to me in some weird way. Not sure why, it's just one of those things I have. So landscaping tends to be very stressful for me, and it's always the thing I do last because I'm avoiding it as long as I possibly can. So this was the build at the first hand-in where I so far had free reins to do pretty much what I wanted, and now we're going to start getting into all the changes I make after we get feedback. So currently I'm starting to rework the floor plan because as I mentioned earlier, that was part of the feedback. I didn't get specific feedback on this, but it was just something they said, okay, go over your floor plans, maybe you can do something. I looked at this build and I also looked at the Cozy Corner house, which is the starter in the town area, because those were the two builds that they had mentioned in the feedback that had very similar floor plans. When looking at the starter, it was really difficult to rework that space, and I tried so many different combinations, but I just couldn't make it work. So instead, I came back to this house and looked at, okay, maybe I can work something out here. And in the end, I do. I am essentially swapping the kitchen for the bathroom. And like I said before, I think it really helps the space make more sense because now you have all this open area around that large fireplace, which is kind of a key feature for this cabin in my opinion anyway. Another good thing that came out of reworking the floor plan is that I now have so much more space in the bathroom. So utilizing that space, I managed to fit in the bathtub that comes with the pack, and I think it really worked out nicely for this cabin. I don't normally like putting bathtubs in my builds, and if you've seen anything I've built before, you will probably notice that it's very, very rare for me to add them. It's normally if there's a very specific style I'm going for, maybe, or type of build. But yeah, it's not common, so this is a little bit special in that it's one of the very few builds where I actually put one in. Now I'm messing around with the kitchen to try and work out how to put all the pieces in. I really like how the kitchen ended up because you have all these different little shelves and open spaces and cabinets, and they aren't necessarily perfectly neatly lined up. And I think that really also leans into that old cabin vibe that I was going for. Another change I'm making is moving things around so that I can fit in a desk space. I really wanted to use the antique, large desk that came with the pack, but I was having problems making it fit because I've now worked out all the different zones for the area, and the only place where I could put that desk is essentially in front of the window, and that just didn't look nice. So for that reason, I ended up picking the far simpler desk, and I was happy with that in the end. I am back in the bedroom again, and it has a new color again. It will also change color again before the final delivery. Now, speaking of final delivery, at the end of this video, I will put in a very short build tour. So that will be exactly how the house looked like when I handed it over to the team for the last time. Now, notice that wardrobe. That is one of my favorite items in this pack, and it is just stunning. Since I tend to gravitate towards a lot of rustic type builds like this, I am sure I will definitely be using it a lot in future builds. Another favorite is this particular chair in that yellow and white swatch. It is just so stunning, and I will definitely be making excuses to make it fit into future builds. Another favorite is that cowhide chair that I have in front of the fireplace. I think that was one of the very first items that I pulled out when going through the catalog for the first time, and I just think it is stunning. I even managed to fit it into two builds because I also have it in the Canter Cottage in a bit of a different swatch. I am back in the bathroom, and I am currently trying to rework the space a bit so that I can fit in the bathtub that has come in. So as I mentioned a little bit before, not all the items will be in when we start building, and the team would update the game dev version that we had, and they would put in new items as they were being released. The only items we were unsure would actually make it in time before we had to make our final delivery was the kitchen counters. The counters came in very, very late, so late that we didn't actually think we would be able to place them ourselves, and the team might have had to do it, which would have made it a little bit trickier in terms of working out the exact color swatches, etc. But luckily, they came in right at the last minute, so we could put those in ourselves and work out the colors we wanted for our space. Now you can see that the fireplace has come in, so I am starting to update the build and replace the stand-in objects with the actual objects that were intended for the house. You will notice that I am now spending a lot more time with small details. So I'm checking the color swatches a lot. I'm fiddling with details a lot. I'm also flicking through different options because I'm now trying to work out the final details of the build and getting it exactly how I want it. Currently, I'm moving the stove because part of the feedback they pointed out that because I've chosen a wood stove because that made the most sense for this build, I should probably have it near a window in terms of ventilation, which actually made really sense to me. Now, as I told you before, I am, as a builder, very indecisive even at the best of times. But for this, there are two main factors that make me a lot more indecisive than normal. One, of course, being that when you are asked to build for an official Sims pack, yeah, you're gonna bet that I am thinking even harder on every single decision I make because I want it to be essentially perfect. The second reason for it is that this is a very small space, which means every single item has so much more significance in that space. I think people often assume that when you have a smaller build like this, it equals an easier build, but I actually think it's the other way around. Now, as we are working on the last elements here, you can see that I've added a guitar for Don because I imagine that when you live in a place like this, you would definitely be sitting outside by the fireplace every now and then. Another remark I got from the team was actually regarding my choice of curtains. Right now, I have the blinds in the bathroom and in the living area, but before that, I actually had some of those base game curtains. Now, the feedback from the team was that perhaps they are a little bit fancy for the cabin, and I found this amusing because I had simply picked them because they happened to match up in the color I was going for, and that was pretty much it. I didn't really know they were considered fancy at all. Another thing is that I changed the columns. So I originally used the square columns for this, but the team actually pointed out that every single one of us happened to have used the square columns and no one was using the round ones, so they asked maybe one of us can look into making a change. So I did. The last thing now is, of course, updating the ceilings because we can do that now. I almost nearly forgot about it. It was actually because Chrissy was doing it that made me realize that, oh, holy hell, I have to do that. Thanks to that, there are no glaring white ceilings and only beautiful wood ceilings, exactly how it should be. Finally, I want to say a huge thank you to every single one of you that have come to watch this video, and especially every single one of you that have watched it all the way to the end. I appreciate it so much, especially since I am not a YouTuber and this is my first ever video, so thank you so much for that. Canyon Crossing is so special to me, and I am so honored I got to build this for Chestnut Ridge. I hope all of you guys will enjoy it as much in game as I had fun while building it for you. So, thank you so much, guys, and happy simming!